Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Joe Glass, I'm a comic book writer and creator, and today we're here to talk about WandaVision episode 6. Obviously this is the 6th episode now in the Marvel Studios Disney Plus original TV series following Wanda and Vision, and also now mysteriously, spoilers, Pietro Maximoff. As I say, as part of this sort of general sort of recap, discussion, theory busting kind of thing, they are going to be massive spoilers for WandaVision. So please, if you have not yet seen WandaVision up to episode 6, do not watch this video. Instead, go and watch the series and then come back and we can discuss it then, because you really do not want to be spoiled on this series, I promise you. So without further ado, we've got a lot to get through, so we should speed off. We start off immediately seeing what this week's family sitcom theme is going to be, and it is Malcolm in the Middle, of all things. I was a little surprised to see this one. I gotta admit, I wasn't too sure what direction they would go for the 90s themed sort of episode, but Malcolm in the Middle was a bit of a surprise, and I gotta admit, I actually really loved it. It also meant that we got a great chance to see a bit more of the twins, Billy and Tommy, and actually get more of a sense of their characters, and it was really awesome to see, because one of the things I love most about this show so far is they've really got the characterization of Billy and Tommy right, as of the characters in the comic books. So it's really awesome to see this in play. The actors playing them are superb, so I'm really excited to see where Billy and Tommy wind up. Something which immediately was obvious in the opening credits, which are right at the beginning of this particular entry in WandaVision, giving that Malcolm in the Middle style opening credits, was that Agnes is part of the opening credits this time. I don't remember any of the other Westview residents being a major part of the opening credits before. Generally, like I say, you might see them in the background kind of thing, or they might just be wandering around and you might see a slight wave. There was that brief moment, I think, in an earlier episode where Geraldine appears in one, but generally it is more just sort of they're like extras on a show. Whereas this time Agnes has a fairly prominent position in the opening credits sequence and is even like named on the sequence, which kind of makes me wonder, like, what is different about her compared to other Westview residents. The show immediately starts off with a very 90s / early noughties direct to camera narration element, this time actually coming from Billy. It is really awesome to see that it's not just Wanda or possibly Vision who are going to be doing these direct to camera elements, and I'm kind of interested to see how that might play out in the next episode, because obviously the next episode is going to be very much noughties family sitcom, and appears from previous trailers to be very much based on Modern Family. So I'm very intrigued to see how that's going to play out, with giving other characters more of a moment to speak directly to the audience, as it were. We very quickly see that it's a Halloween episode. The boys are like playing with their Uncle Pietro, who is still here from his surprise visit at the end of the last episode, and is still very much not the Pietro which Marvel Cinematic Universe fans would know and love. And it's kind of interesting to see how that's playing out, but we'll be getting to that. And obviously, being Halloween episodes, everyone's in sort of costumes. Marvelously, the twins actually wind up in costumes which kind of hint towards the characters that they are in the comic books. Billy's in particular looks like a really good rendition of what his original superhero costume is as Wiccan in the Marvel comics. So it's kind of awesome to see that. Tommy's looks more like a young Quicksilver's, but at the same time, Tommy's original costume isn't the most detailed of costumes. It's pretty plain green silver sort of thing, so just having that sort of little hint towards his superpowers as opposed to more than his costume makes sense. I'm not sure how they would have been able to explain away an Easter egg to his costume like they did the others. For example, Wanda, when she comes down, is in a very comics accurate Scarlet Witch costume and lands a joke about it being a traditional Sokovian fortune teller costume. Gotta admit, that joke didn't land for me. It was slightly uncomfortable. They've actually really undermined and sort of whitewashed Wanda and Pietro in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and really downplayed their Romany ancestry. Certainly I could understand the removal of their connection to characters like Magneto, because obviously at that time X-Men and mutants couldn't be part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and obviously was then done as part of the worst retcon in comic books history, or one of them, in that removed their connection to Magneto in the comics as well to fit in with the movies. It doesn't, however, really make sense that they've never really explored the fact that they are Romany. The Romany backstory didn't need to be removed to remove that connection to mutants, etc. And then to have this gag, as much as I really respect Elizabeth Olsen's fight to have more comics accurate costumes appear in the show, but apparently also since she started with the character has been fighting to have that kind of costume, I gotta admit this gag just wasn't it for me. It felt like it was a little too mocking of a culture which they've already kind of thrown out with that character. So not for me. We quickly see in this family environment that Wanda's kind of losing control more and more of what's going on, in that she's more and more confused about what's going on. Like, she's very much unsure about why Pietro is there, about why Pietro remembers things differently than she does, apparently, but also why Pietro looks different. She's very much visibly in confusion. And suggests that loss of control of what's going on, which is then obviously amplified when Vision comes down, and we have a moment between them which is on one hand quite sweet, but also shows Vision's frustration in his awareness of that something is off and that something is going on, and that Wanda's part of it and that Wanda's doing it, and then has that sort of really sort of, it becomes painfully evident that there is no friction between Wanda and Vision. This is made all the more obvious, of course, when with a line from Vision where he just says, "And Wanda, be good," before giving her a peck on the cheek. And that line was immediately just like, ooh, felt like a punch in the gut. We're back out into actual reality, and we immediately pick up where we left off with Wanda and Sword in that little confrontation from the previous episode. And which also kind of implies that there's a different sort of time thing going on. Aside from the sort of different eras each time we're seeing, time seems to be progressing almost faster within the hex than it does outside of a hex. But also you get the fact that we're seeing immediately after, and we pick up immediately with Hayward and everything, and it looks like I was right. Hayward is definitely being set up as a villain for WandaVision. And thus we also know then that Sword as a whole is really the nefarious party in this. We don't really see fully what is going on here, but he's generally just being kind of dickish, kind of an ass, and also we then get the suggestion that he's very much anti-superpowered people. This sort of bigotry is kind of explained in a way which kind of, well, hinted at rather, in a way which kind of explains where it's coming from, but at the same time kind of highlights him as potentially someone who does not have the best interests of the situation at heart, and certainly doesn't have the best interests of anyone who has super abilities at heart. As our heroes in the reality situation, Monica, Jimmy and Darcy are taken away, we get a really awesome moment where we get to see Jimmy Woo kicking ass, and not being funny, but it was kind of hot. And it was really, really awesome to see, because up until now he's kind of almost been played a little bit like a comic relief character. To get to see him be actually a badass and kind of explain how he is an FBI agent really was awesome to see, so I'm really excited that they put that in there. We pop into Westview and we see the family start trick-or-treating, and what is immediately obvious is that Westview has kids now, whereas before they had not been seen, and obviously in the previous episode Vision very much pointed it out. All of a sudden the kids have reappeared, so it's kind of interesting to see that, because up until this point we didn't know why the kids weren't present. It's continues to be a mystery, but we now see that they are there, so obviously they were accessible, and it's going to be curious, I think, to see why they weren't part of Wanda's reality from the beginning. Wanda keeps on gently pushing Pietro to discuss their shared past, and there being some sort of difference between both of their recollections of it. However, Pietro really seems to resist this in a way which really suggests that he's aware of what's going on. He seems to be very much aware that this isn't how he normally acts, that this is all very much not a real situation, but also kind of suggests that he's willing to play along in a way, which is odd for the character, to say the least. Popping over to the Vision search of the town's edges, and we see that Wanda's control does not extend even the full length of the hex. While people are sort of within this false reality that she's created, those which are like far away from the central mass that I guess would be like where Wanda and Vision and their family are based, seem to be stuck into loops, so that they become almost like set dressing. We start to see this, and like we seem to understand it a lot quicker than Vision does, which is kind of bugged me. There's a lot of Vision search which felt like it could have been condensed down in this episode. Instead, like he must be wandering for hours before he sort of realizes, oh, hey, everyone's in a loop. We then get the commercial break, and it is the first one which does not appear to feature the family that have appeared in all the ones previously. Another thing I would say about it, it's this weird little claymation thing. It is very 90s. It definitely is reminiscent of commercial breaks in that period, but it's incredibly creepy. It's very sinister looking, and I gotta admit, if there was any kind of Easter eggs as to the Marvel Universe in it, like there have been previously, I didn't quite get them. There was just the item is called Yo Magic. Obviously magic is kind of what's happening, I guess. But aside from that, it was just this really kind of sinister moment, which I felt was very odd and created a very disturbing air for the rest of the episode, which we definitely would see. Back into Wanda's fake reality, and the kids actually are they sort of generally doing like Halloweeny stuff, going trick-or-treating, and we seem to see, or we appear to see, that Tommy is the first of the twins to get superpowers, and he immediately goes off and uses super speed. Note that I say appears to be the first to get superpowers here. I kind of have a theory on that, and I'm going to touch on that a little later. We then get a moment where we see that Pietro is definitely aware as to what's going on, and he's openly discussing with Wanda about how this all started. Pietro, however, seems to act like Wanda in that he doesn't know how it began. He says that he just remembers hearing her calling for him. This is very reminiscent of the relationship of the characters in the comic books, which was an awesome little touch to see. But it does also kind of add another element to me, which kind of makes me think something, which again, kind of we'll discuss a little bit later. Popping back out into real reality, and we discover that our little heroes in the Sword sort of B-plot have just snuck away. They've got their little area now where they've set up, and they are discovered that Hayward definitely is up to something nefarious. He actually has access to view it within the Hex area, but he's not told anyone about it, and he's actively tracking not just the residents of Westview, but specifically Vision. He's not tracking Wanda, which is what everyone else would think, seeing as Wanda is, as he describes, the primary antagonist of everything that's going on. Instead, he's tracking Vision, which again ties into what my query from last week was, how did Sword have Vision's body and why? And this is where I really start to feel like I'm kind of on a right track here with this theory that Sword are actually the antagonists of this story. I think we're going to see that they are actively after Vision, that I think Hayward is wanting to weaponize the Vision. So as much as he was saying about how Wanda was going against the Vision's wishes from his last will and testament, I think we're going to see that Sword were actually already doing that. Again, I have a few theories on that, which I'm going to discuss more towards the end of the video. Popping back inside, Vish finds Agnes, and they have a little moment. Agnes appears to be towards the end of town. We don't know if she was trying to escape or if it is like she says, but she took a wrong turn. But certainly he gives her a moment of clarity, and the curious thing which comes out there was when Agnes points out that he's an Avenger, Vision doesn't know what the Avengers are. Now, Vision's already said that he has blank spots in time in his memory, which he's already pointed out he shouldn't have, being a synthezoid, and that he can't really remember a lot of his past before they got to Westview. It is really particularly interesting, however, that he doesn't know anything about the Avengers. I mean, for him then, how did him and Wanda meet? How did their relationship begin? It does make me wonder exactly what the extent of Vision's memory is and why the Avengers in particular would be left out. Then obviously we get the downward spiral whenever someone who's been brought out of Wanda's sort of mind control seems to have, and before that, however, Agnes does sort of reveal to Vision that he was dead, because she queries about whether she's dead. It's going to be interesting to see how this affects Vision. We don't really see how this revelation affects him in this episode. I dare say it is going to have some sort of comeback, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when he confronts Wanda about it. Back out in the real reality, and we see that our little team of heroes have discovered more secrets from Hayward's database from the hacking that they've been doing, and that is Monica's medical records, which actually show that Monica has been altered by her time within the Hex area. When I say hex sphere, that's kind of what Wanda's powers are called in comic books, but like this is not a sphere, that would just get confusing. It's a hex. It's kind of going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because I think it's very clear that we're going to see Monica get superpowers. She has superpowers in comic books. I think this is going to be how she gets superpowers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but what is interesting is if this has affected Wanda that way, then surely it's also affecting the rest of the Westview residents. If it's affecting the rest of the Westview residents in this way, does this mean that they're all going to possibly develop superpowers? Is this actually tying into another popular theory which is in the rounds, is this going to be how we get mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I personally don't kind of think this is going to be how we get mutants. It might be how we get some sort of other superpower characters, but it's certainly not going to be mutants, I would think, because timing-wise, it's just not really going to work. How would you get an X-Men team if you haven't got a Xavier who is already, by that point, well-versed in his powers and teaching people how to use their powers? So I don't think it will. I'm not entirely sure that this show will actually be responsible for mutants. I think we're probably still a little ways off before we get mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but maybe I'm wrong. They also mentioned that there is a final firewall that Hayward has, which we're still trying to break through, or rather Darcy's still trying to break through. I'm curious as to what is behind that firewall. What do you think is behind there? What do you think Project Cataract is? Mention it down in the comments below. Back within Wanda's fake reality, we get a really interesting moment where Pietro suddenly questions Wanda, where were you hiding all of these kids? Again, Pietro is very much aware of what is going on and seems to be okay with it, which is very not right for the character. Like, even in the sense of whichever Pietro this is, both versions of the character that we've seen previously in cinematic releases, whether it be the Fox's X-Men universe or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, were heroic enough that Wanda kidnapping a bunch of kids would actually be something he'd not be cool with. So to have this Pietro kind of suggest that he's kind of cool with it and he kind of understands it, but he just is curious as to where she was keeping them, that seems off. In fact, it's this scene which actually brings me to a question: is this really Pietro? Or is this in fact someone else wearing Pietro's face, even if it is a different version of Pietro, as a way of sort of breaking behind Wanda's walls and sort of using that familiarity to get something out of her? In which case, who would be doing that? Who would want to be trying to get something from Wanda? And are they connected to what is going on in the first place? Obviously, one popular fan theory is that it is Mephisto masquerading as Pietro, or could be Nightmare masquerading as Pietro, but certainly it seems like Pietro is not who we think he is. We then get a very powerful sort of end scene through the episode where we actually see Vision leave the Hex, or at least try to. Unlike where we've seen people previously actually leave, the Hex almost seems to hold on to him and seems to be trying to drag him back. But in the process of doing it, it's unclear whether it is the Hex's pull or whether this is because of the status of Vision outside of the Hex. Vision is immediately being pulled apart, literally pulled piece by piece, in front of waiting sword agents and director Hayward, who just watch, who kind of almost help him by not doing anything, by just allow him to sort of destroy himself. Why would they want him to destroy himself? Obviously, that is immediately on Darcy's question, as she comes running out and immediately gets arrested and handcuffed to one of the cars. And it does make me think, as I say, again, tying into Sword of the antagonists, or at least the sword that is under Director Hayward is an antagonist. By this point, Monica and Jimmy are heading off to meet her mysterious astromechanic. Who do you think that's going to be? Obviously, the popular fan theory is that it's Reed Richards, and that this is how we're going to get the Fantastic Four. Again, I'm not sure, but I think they would introduce something as big as the Fantastic Four in quite this way. I think it's possibly more likely that it's going to be Ant-Man or some other character, but we'll see. I think we might actually be finding that out next week. But certainly what we are seeing here is that Director Hayward is the bad guy of this. And my theory is that he had Vision's corpse transferred to Sword, so that they could weaponize him or create some sort of weapons, in particular anti-super people weapons, or possibly even to track down other superhumans that he was aware of by accessing his memories. And that is what caused Wanda to attack and take the body back. That he was stealing the corpse back from whatever Vision's grave was at that point. So the video we've been presented has shown that Wanda gone off the rails and is very much the antagonist, is actually taken out of context. What happened then to then cause Wanda to create the Hex and take over Westview? is unclear. I think it could possibly be something to do with a fragment of a Mind Stone left behind in Vision, or possibly some other connection, and then obviously possible that it could be Mephisto or Nightmare involved. But yeah, I think what we're basically going to see is that S.W.O.R.D. have really actually been the cause of everything that's happened to date. It does mean as well that I think after this show we're going to see a very different S.W.O.R.D. I think we're going to see S.W.O.R.D. actually be taken over by Monica, and that she's going to become the new director of S.W.O.R.D., and that's her position in the Marvel Cinematic Universe going forward. I also like to think that she would bring on Jimmy and Darcy as agents of S.W.O.R.D., and that might be why the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Studios and Disney Plus were so interested in this idea of doing a sort of X-Files-y style but bit more accessible Agents of S.W.O.R.D. series. Hopping back into the Hex, we see that Billy senses what is going on with Vision and automatically uses his powers to stop a speeding Tommy coming towards him. I think this is actually just the first visible time that we've seen Billy show powers. I think that Billy's had his powers for a while. In fact, for me, I personally think that Billy might actually be, I think he was responsible for the aging up of the twins in the previous episode. It certainly looked that way whenever they looked at each other. I kind of got the impression that it was more Tommy looking at Billy to give the okay to sort of do it. And that's how we got the aging up. But I also think that it's possible that Billy's actually been doing things with the fake reality, which explains why Wanda has seen things happen which she didn't do, which she didn't plan, and which would have genuinely surprised her. I think it's quite possible that Billy is actually responsible for bringing Pietro in. Whether, I don't think he's nefarious. I think it's a case of like he's a kid trying to help his mum, but something piggybacked on that, because I don't think that's Pietro. I think that is someone masquerading as Pietro. The episode ends with Wanda taking a big moment and using a massive surge of her powers to extend the size of the Hex field, meaning that now all of Westview is now encased, possibly further. Certainly the sword areas encased, and in fact so is Darcy. So what is Darcy going to be like in episode 7 now that she's going to be part of what is going to be the noughties era family sitcom reality? We're also going to see what happened with Monica and Jimmy. Did they escape the expansion of the Hex field? Obviously they did. We've seen in the trailer that something goes crashing into the Hex field, and that's clearly going to be the vehicle that they are out there looking for. And it's going to be curious to see how this is going to affect everything going on, because if Wanda didn't have full control of all of the Westview residents, and like people towards the edges of the town were essentially just stuck in loops and things like that, then how is this going to play out now that it's even bigger? Are we going to see her struggle to control even more people? Is it going to be a case that there are even fewer people actually in episode, as it were? It's going to bring up a lot of interesting things. I'm really excited to see where it goes. I will say that this episode, the way it ended, did feel slightly anticlimactic, in the sense that I think we all by this point hate when the please stand by screen comes up, but I think this moment really felt like it just dropped all of a sudden. It didn't really feel like the story had ended and we just suddenly got a drop and like, oh right, we have to wait for next week now. So yeah, I'm excited for next week, though. I think it's going to be awesome. I'm excited to see what happens with the twins. I want to see whether their powers continue to get used, Billy's in particular, and I need to see what's going to happen. Are they going to age up again? It's going to be exciting to see. Yeah, that's me. That's my little recap of the episode and some of my theories, and also discussing some of the other theories which have been going on with WandaVision. What do you think? Did you enjoy this episode? Do you have any theories as to what's going on, what Hayward's plan is, what Project Cataract is? Leave it down in the comments below, and obviously anything really interesting I might bring up in the next sort of recap video. I've been really enjoying and loving this series. I hope you are. Next time I might try and do a Vision inspired look after my somewhat Quicksilver inspired look. I wish I had a darker blue shirt, but I just don't. So yeah, feel free to like, comment, and please subscribe for all future updates at Joe Glass Comics. I've been Joe Glass, comic book writer and creator, and YouTube verbalizer and waffler. And yeah, thanks for listening. And yeah, we'll see you next week to discuss more WandaVision.